after they finish racing, combining breeding and ratings, how does that work? Do you have to have a particular horse with a particular rating to then pair with another horse with a particular rating?
That's good. They're good questions. It's not something I would have thought of asking, but yeah, you're right. Let's say you've set your heart on, you've won the lottery, and you've set your heart on. Oh, mum's got a mare that want to race over hurdles, but I want to send it to Galileo, and Coolmore will go, well, you can have a Galileo nomination for €300,000, Hannah, but I'm afraid you can't send that mare to it. We only take group winners to Galileo or listed or better winners. So if you've got a really good stallion, the stallion owners, yes, they want your business, but they also want to protect their stallion. And they'd say, well, we don't want that moderate horse that you've got to be going to Galileo. Why don't you try this one? And that's the way it sort of works. Now, if you owned Enable, for example, and said, oh, I'd like this is a silly theory, but I'd like Enable to go to Galileo. They'd want Enable to go to Galileo so much. They say, oh, Hannah, that's so kind of you. I tell you what, you can. This will be a 2-year contract. You can have year 1, and we'll have year 2. So you can have the progeny of year 1, and we'll have the progeny of year 2. That's called foal sharing. So quite a lot of studs operate in loosely like that.
So, for example, say you've got your 2 horses, and you want your mare to go off to this really good stallion. The mare's retired. They're not as great as they could be. However, further up the line, they had really good breeding and potential. Can this still be a possibility? Because they might think this mare wasn't great. However, going up the ladder, let's say, they have potential that might trickle through. Does that?
Yeah, that happens often. You get a mare that's unraced from a really good stud. Why was she unraced? She might have had a bad injury. The trainer might have had a virus that year. The horses didn't run, or she ran once and she was disappointing. Or she ran once and she maybe did something like she got an injury that wasn't really serious, but it was time consuming. So, run once doesn't look any good, but well bred, yes, absolutely. I don't think any clever breeder would refuse that a mare like that. No.
And that's why then the breeding history is so important, so they can look back.
Pedigree is important for everybody because, as we explained earlier, it's got to have registered thoroughbred parentage. But because most people, not everybody, but most people who follow racing and probably most Saturday punters that bet on racing, they know a little bit about it. I'm not saying they study it or as keen on it as you might be or I've always been, but they know, for example, that Nathaniel is going to get horses that largely stay well, and that Kodiak is going to get horses that sprint really well. They're fast. They know, a lot of them know basics, and because you know basics, you understand a little bit more about the horses. Because if the horses don't have a pedigree, they can't be thoroughbreds. Therefore, if the pedigree is part of them and influences how far they're going to run in a lot of cases, or how fast or slow they are, it's important to everybody, whether you're just a punter, a breeder, someone that studies form. You've got to be cognizant of some of it.
So let's say now we have our foal. Yep. And I just want to talk about the process of it getting its rating. So it has to, well, how old is it when a racehorse is broken? Is it 2?
Most of them, not all of them, will be broken as yearlings, 1 year old. And, that's a process that generally, if the horse is straightforward, will take a couple of months. And if you think about it logically again, if the horse has been through a sale ring, it's been to a sale before that, it'll have learned to walk in hand with a groom, to turn right and to turn left. It won't have had a bridle on it, and a bit in its mouth, but it will have had a head collar on and have been made to walk up and down, and you get used to people and noise and things like that. So its muscles will have been slightly developed. So then you start to break it, which takes probably about 2 months before you start to ride them away. And then they go to their trainers. And I think someone like Mark Johnson would say that he starts by well, they just walk and trot to start with. Then when they start to go a little bit faster, they do a furlong for 3 or 4 weeks, and then 2 furlongs, and then 3 furlongs. And then maybe by the end of January, some of the sharper ones with trainers with quite a lot of 2-year-olds, they'll start putting them up sides and going a little bit. But I don't know for certain, but I doubt they go 5 furlongs, even though eventually they're going to run 5. They'll be going really sharp for 3. And so forth. The ones with more backward pedigrees, bigger, slightly different shape, you wouldn't force them because they're not ready for it.
So please, can you just explain the process then from after the break-in period to then leading up to how they get their ratings?
Well, they have to run to get a rating. So what is a rating? A rating is a way, and it's a way of expressing a horse's ability. Mm-hmm. And I said to you, it's not good enough for you to say to me, I've got a group mare. The first thing I'm going to say is, what's it rated? And then if you said to me it was 100, I said, oh, well, you probably have, yeah. What's the best way to explain this? Well, Timeform will assess them straight away, but so the official handicappers, the BHA handicappers, don't make mistakes. They generally like to see a horse. Last year, because of COVID and there wasn't as much time for the season, they said they'd give most horses a rating after 2 runs. So they have to have either won a race. In the past, it always used to be at least 3 runs, but if you've won a race and run a couple of times, you can get a mark. If you've run once in some instances, you can get a run. But generally, the old-fashioned way was 3 runs. It's now 2. As I sit here now, I haven't checked whether that's changed. I should have done. So let's say Timeform are going to put a race on the first race of the 2-year-old race of the season, which traditionally is called the Brocklesby Stakes. Yeah. It's the first 2-year-old race run at the Lincoln meeting. So I think it was 8, it might have been 7 or 8 horses ran in this race, right? They'd never run before, and they crossed the line, and immediately someone at Timeform gives the winner a rating. And let's say, and this will be somewhere near right, let's say he gave that winner a rating of 80, which would be quite good. How has he done it? Well, the easy way is to go back and look at what the last 5, 10 Brocklesby winners were rated from previous years, average them all out and put that figure on. And it won't be far away doing that, because he will know, he's seen all those Brocklesbys. He will know from hindsight whether those ratings on those Brocklesby winners are right, and go, well, this looked an average field. I've got to get a starting point, so I'm going to put 80 on the winner. Now, let's say that you owned the 3rd horse in that Brocklesby, right? And it was beaten over 5 furlongs, and it was beaten a total of 3 lengths by the winner. So your horse finished 3rd in the Brocklesby, right? Beaten 3 lengths. This is what we call, I made this when I was 1974, when I first went to Timeform, and it's a weight for distance beaten table. So over 5 furlongs.
What is it? Sorry, I couldn't see it. What is it, a sheet?
It's just a sheet of paper, and you'll find it in lots of books. Mm-hmm. Just put weight for distance table in horse racing. Over 5 furlongs, 3 lengths equates to £9. So that's the scale we use for every length beaten over 5 furlongs. We use £3. Your horse was beaten 3 lengths, so 3 3s equal 9. So the winner's rated 80, and you're rated therefore
71.
So your horse is rated 71. So if you factor in that, I really don't want to lose you now, and just tell me this is too much in this.
Okay.
We have what we call a weight for age table.
Right.
If you were to run 2-year-olds against 3-year-olds, against 4-year-olds in March, you would have to give them, the 4-year-old would have to give the 3-year-old some weight, and the 4-year-old would have to give your little baby a lot of weight, because that is the scale that was drawn up many, many years ago by a man called Admiral Rouse to make them raceable together, to fit them together, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that scale from March through to December reduces. Now think about it. You own a little baby,
Mm-hmm.
a 2-year-old. Why would it reduce?
Because of the way he's growing, so perhaps
Yes,
the muscles and structures not quite as developed.
absolutely. So the horse grows, and it's considered, they're not actually fully mature by 4. A lot of them aren't, but they're considered that runs out in a lot of cases, other than over very long distances. So from March, it would reduce by about £2 every fortnight, because that is the average development of the horses. So if we think a horse rate is 71 in March, and it goes down £4 every month. Are you with me?
Does it, because it's getting older, it would go down.
It's getting older.
Right.
In theory, if a horse is rated 71 in March and it strengthens to the extent I've said, what should it be rated at the end of April?
So it would be 4 lots of 4.
71 and 4.
71 add 4.
Yeah.
75.
So that's its rate of progress. So by the end of May, it will be 79, because they're developing, they're getting, that's the theory behind it. Now, as you know, it doesn't always work out like that, because some get injured, some are tiny and they were ready early on and there's no development in them, etc., etc., etc. There's theory and there's practice in horse racing. And I probably haven't explained that very well, but you have to start, and one way to start with a race is, ordinarily I do that, but this race has been run for 70 or 80 years, and probably longer than that. But I know I can look at the last 10 and they were all average fields, and that winner was rated 80. So I'm going to stick 80 on the Brocklesby and start from there and see how we go. And that literally, in some shape or form, is how you start.
So is that why a lot of people compare horses to perhaps one from the year before and things? They always compare their rating perhaps to what this horse is running like now and in certain races.
Yeah. The way racing is set up, because new horses come at the same time every year, so it's a process that repeats itself every year, and it's the same with the new additions, the new horses, new stallions going to stud and the new broodmares going to stud, but they're just added to the pool that are already there. You know, it's a cycle, it repeats itself. So what you've just described is perfectly logical. Mm-hmm. You know, we'll say in June, oh, this year's 3-year-olds aren't as good as last year's 3-year-olds. Now, maybe the ones that ran in the Derby this year aren't as good as the ones as last year's Derby. Maybe they're not. But as a generalization, at the end of the year, there won't be that much between them.
So ratings change slightly every month from when they're babies, because I always wondered if it was every race, or so Timeform ratings are then done on their ability, body and age.
The Timeform ratings come about after the race. The situation I described to you of a horse improving with the weight for age scale about £4, that's theory. If we take 6 months, 6 fours are 24, a horse that's genuinely about low 70s at the start of March, in theory, could be low to mid 90s by the end of the season. That's its potential, provided it runs regularly and it improves regularly. That's how the scale's set up. But horses ratings, they don't have to run and they're changed, because let's say that the handicapper doing that Brocklesby had a rush of blood and said, oh, I'm going to put 95 on that this year. And immediately, if I'd been working at Timeform, I know my boss would have come down and said, what's this on the Brocklesby winner? Have you got something to back this up? That you know, the race average says it's 80. You've said 95. That's a very high rating. Now, over the next few weeks, the horses from that race will go and run. And the handicapper will either be proved correct or incorrect. And if he's incorrect and he gets 2 or 3 run that very quickly makes that 95 look silly, he'll pull all the horses in the race down because he knows he got it too high. Remember, horses, and this might seem as I'm nitpicking, horses don't run to ratings. Handicappers say they do. It's a man's or a woman's impression of what a horse has done. It's not an actual thing.
Yeah. How would you describe the difference between a Timeform rating and a handicap mark?
In principle, they're the same thing, but they're arrived at slightly differently. There won't be huge variables in them. It's sort of difficult to explain to you without getting into a really complicated use of that scale that we just used.
Mm-hmm.
There are variables. Remember, Timeform had two purposes as a handicap publication. Firstly, Phil Ball developed this system, and at the end of the year, he produced an annual. Right? Have you seen them?
The black book.
Timeform racehorses books.
Are they the black books?
No. Oh. I'll go get you. Could you bear with me 20 seconds? I'll go and get you one. You see how thick that is?
Oh, is that in 1 year?
Yeah, that is all the horses that ran in England in 2019. Sorry, can you see it?
Just up a bit. Yeah.
All the horses that ran in 2019 in 1 year, plus all the best horses from England, Ireland, and France.
Oh, wow.
So when the season finishes in the first week in November, all the people that work on the flat in Timeform would sit down and sort all the good ones out and write essays about them. So the ones that get essays are the best ones. So that's all about Magna Graecia, for example.
The 2 pages.
Mm-hmm. Sorry?
The 2 pages.
No, it's about 5 pages. I can just show you 2 at the minute. So they get that. They get an extended an extended essay about them. The others just get small comments, like the first one there's about 6 lines, just summarizes it.
Yeah.
But essentially, the rating in that is re-handicap. The handicappers all go through their work again and say, no, I'll pull that down £4. I push this one up 3, etc., 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 and they arrive at a final rating. It's master rating. Timeform also exists to find a betting angle for punters, and if they see horses that they want you to be interested in, they'll add pounds to their ratings because they've won easily or they were unlucky in running. So whereas in most cases the BHA handicap mark reflects what they've done on the track, sometimes a Timeform handicap mark has been inflated to reflect not just what they've done on the track, what they think they might do next time.
Was that part of your job then, where you had to do the write-ups each year at Timeform?
Yeah, I was the way Timeform worked. You were a team. I was the eyes. If it was me doing the report, there were 4 of us. The 4 of us were the eyes for the company. Then we had handicappers, and then we had comment writers that took all our work, the reporters' work, and they go through it and say, yeah, we think Jim's right about most of that there, and we'll write it up accordingly. Or it's happened once or twice a week. Jim, we don't agree with this. You know, we've looked through it all and we think we're not going to take the same view as you have over this rating for X, Y, and Z. And that's their job, because ultimately we're producing something for people to buy. It's not whether it suits Jim McGrath or the comment writer or the handicapper. We all married our work together for the benefit of a customer.
And would you perhaps ask one of your colleagues their opinion too on a horse that you were writing up on? Would you say, what do you think?
Yeah, very much so.
Oh, okay. And then you'd all work together. So when you said, you know, your boss would come over sometimes and maybe you'd say, have you got evidence to back this up? What if there was a case where you've given a rating to a horse and no one else agreed? Would you then have to change your write-up and rating for this horse?
Not if I was experienced and I really stood my ground and said, look, there's this and this that you're not thinking about. Now, in the case where ratings are high, I mean, I gave you they're all hypothetical examples about that Brocklesby winner being 95, which is very high for the time of year. On the track, I might have said it's 80, and I get back to the office and he says it's 95. And he might say to me, well, have you seen the time figure yet? Now, an analysis of times, which I really think I'll fry your head if I go into it. An analysis of times is another way of looking at horses. And he might turn around and say, well, there's compelling evidence on the clock that this horse, which won well, is significantly better than an average Brocklesby winner. And because of that, that's the way we're going. And I go, well, if you've got compelling evidence, fine. It's the customer we're interested in, not my ego or your ego. We're working for someone else principally.
Do jockeys know all about, obviously they know what Timeform is, but do they know all the details like you would? Are they taught that?
No, they're not taught it. A lot of jockeys are very sharp on form, very sharp on pedigrees. You'll find the likes of Frankie Dettori and the senior riders, probably even William Buick now, that ride for the big stables, have ridden the dams, the mothers of these horses, or the sires of them, the stallions, and they can see characteristics, and they get off, and the really sharp ones, they do know.